They called him the Ruthless King. Alpha Dominic Blackwood didn't want a wife. He wanted a babysitter for his damaged son, and he was willing to host a humiliating public spectacle to find her. 50 beautiful women from the highest bloodlines arrived at the Blackwood estate, eager to wear the crown, ready to fake their compassion. But when the Alpha King used his disabled child as a cruel test of loyalty, he didn't expect the one woman with nothing to lose to spit in his face and walk away. This is the story of the Omega who refused to play the game, and the king who had to beg for her love. The envelope looked like it was woven from spun gold, but to Tessa Quinn, it felt heavy as a tombstone. She stood in the cramped kitchen of her one-bedroom apartment in downtown Seattle, the rain lashing against the thin window pane. The embossed crest of the Blackwood pack, a silver wolf entangled in briars, shimmered under the flickering fluorescent light. "You have to go, Tess," her landlord, an older beta named Mr. Henderson, said from the doorway. He looked sympathetic, but business was business. "The medical debt from your mother. The pack collectors are getting impatient. If you attend the gala, the king pays a stipend just for showing up. It covers 3 months of rent." Tessa tossed the envelope onto the scarred laminate table. "It's a meat market, Henderson. Alpha Dominic isn't looking for a Luna. He's looking for a PR stunt to cover up the fact that he's a cold-hearted tyrant." Everyone knew the rumors. Dominic Blackwood ran the largest werewolf conglomerate on the West Coast, Blackwood Global. He controlled shipping lines, tech firms, and 3 massive territories. But his private life was a tragedy wrapped in a mystery. His mate had died 5 years ago in a rogue attack that left his son, Leo, paralyzed and mute. Since then, Dominic had become a ghost, a violent, efficient ghost, and now suddenly he was hosting the lunar trials. "I'm an Omega," Tessa said, her voice tight. "I serve coffee at a diner. I don't wear silk gowns, and I certainly don't rub shoulders with the likes of Vanessa St. James." "It's mandatory for eligible bloodlines within the debt bracket," Henderson whispered, pointing to the fine print. "If you refuse, they garnish your wages. You'll be on the street." Tessa closed her eyes. She thought of her mother, who had fought cancer for 3 years. The pack insurance had denied the experimental treatments, forcing Tessa to borrow from loan sharks, sanctioned by the Alpha's treasury. She was 24 years old, working double shifts, and drowning. "Fine," she whispered. "I'll go. I'll eat his free food, drink his expensive champagne, and get cut in the first round. But I'm not dressing up for him." The Blackwood estate was less a house and more a fortress built into the cliffs of the Oregon coast. The waves crashed violently below, echoing the storm brewing in the sky. Tessa arrived in a shuttle bus with 10 other girls. While they wore designer dresses, rented or bought for thousands, Tessa wore a simple navy blue cocktail dress she'd found at a thrift store. It fit her curves modestly, but the fabric was cheap. She held her head high, her chestnut hair pulled back in a severe bun. The grand hall was suffocating. Chandeliers the size of cars hung from the vaulted ceiling. The air smelled of expensive perfume, nervous sweat, and the underlying metallic scent of competitive pheromones. "Look at that charity case," a voice sneered. Tessa didn't have to turn around to know it was Vanessa St. James. Vanessa was the daughter of the Pax Gamma. She was blonde, statuesque, and wearing a red dress that cost more than Tessa's entire life earnings. "I heard she works at Joe's Diner," Vanessa's friend giggled. "She probably smells like bacon grease." "Better than smelling like desperation," Tessa muttered under her breath, grabbing a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray. A hush fell over the room. The heavy oak doors at the top of the grand staircase opened. Alpha Dominic Blackwood stepped out. He was terrifyingly handsome. He stood over 6'4", his shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of the empire he ruled. His hair was black as a raven's wing, and his eyes were the color of storm clouds, grey and turbulent. He wore a tuxedo that fit like a second skin, but his energy was raw, predatory. He didn't look like a host. He looked like a warden. Beside him stood his beta, Kalen, holding a clipboard. But there was no sign of the son. "Welcome," Dominic's voice boomed, deep and baritone. It didn't need a microphone. "You are here because this pack requires a mother figure, a Luna. My advisors tell me I need to stabilize our image." He walked down the stairs, his gaze sweeping over the 50 women like a laser scanner. He didn't look impressed. He looked bored. "I don't care about your lineage. I don't care about your beauty," Dominic said, stopping on the bottom step. "My son, Leo, requires care. He is difficult. The woman who wins this position will be his primary caregiver. You will be tested not on your etiquette, but on your ability to handle the reality of my house." "He means the monster," Vanessa whispered to her friend, loud enough for Tessa to hear. "I heard the kid screams for hours, brain damaged, drools everywhere. I'll just hire a nanny once I get the ring." Tessa's grip on her glass tightened. She looked at the alpha. For a split second, Dominic's eyes locked with hers. He frowned, perhaps sensing her spike of anger, but then moved on. "Enjoy the evening," Dominic said coldly. "The tests begin now." He turned and walked away, disappearing into a side corridor, leaving the women confused. "What tests?" someone asked. Tessa sighed. She just wanted to get through the night, collect her stipend check, and leave. She retreated to the edge of the room, near a service hallway, trying to make herself invisible. She didn't know that the real test wasn't in the ballroom. It was in the shadows. An hour passed. The party was in full swing, but the atmosphere was toxic. The women were posturing, trying to get the attention of the beta or the gamma, hoping to secure a spot in the next round. Tessa felt a headache coming on. The noise was too much. She slipped through a velvet rope that cordoned off a side hallway, looking for a bathroom or a quiet balcony to breathe. The hallway was dimly lit, lined with portraits of ancestors who looked as miserable as Dominic. As she turned a corner, she heard a sound. Crash. Then, a low, frustrated whimper. Tessa paused. She walked further down the hall. There, sitting on the expensive Persian rug, was a small boy. He was about 6 years old, wearing a tiny, uncomfortable-looking suit. He was in a motorized wheelchair, but he had slumped forward, and a plate of food lay shattered on the floor. Spaghetti sauce was splattered all over his white shirt and the expensive rug. The boy was trembling, his hands curled inward against his chest, a sign of cerebral palsy Tessa recognized instantly. Her cousin had a similar condition. The boy was trying to reach for a dropped tablet, but his muscles wouldn't cooperate. Tessa's heart broke. This must be Leo. But what made her blood boil was what she saw next. 2 women, candidates from the ballroom, were walking down the hall. It was Vanessa and her sidekick, Jessica. They stopped, looking down at the child. "Oh my God, look at the mess," Jessica said, wrinkling her nose. "You." "Is that the kid?" Vanessa asked, stepping back to avoid the source. "Hey, boy, move out of the way. We're trying to find the Alpha's study." Leo looked up. His eyes were wide with panic. He opened his mouth, but only a guttural sound came out. He was crying silently. "Gross," Vanessa sneered. She used the toe of her red stiletto to kick the tablet further away from the boy's reach. "Don't touch me." They laughed and stepped over his legs, continuing down the hall. Tessa saw red. She didn't care about the hierarchy. She didn't care about the Alpha. She rushed forward, dropping to her knees beside the boy. Hey, it's okay," she cooed softly, her voice losing all the sharpness she used with the world. "I've got you." Leo flinched, expecting to be yelled at. "I'm not going to hurt you," Tessa promised. She pulled a napkin from her clutch. She'd stolen a few for later, and gently wiped the sauce from his face. "That was a nasty spill, huh? It happens. Gravity's a bully." Leo stared at her. He had his father's storm-grey eyes, but they were innocent, terrified. Tessa grabbed the tablet and wiped it off on her own dress, ruining the cheap fabric. But she didn't care. She checked the screen. It was a communication app. "Here you go, sweetheart," she said, placing it in his hands and adjusting his fingers so he could grip it. "Are you hurt?" Leo shook his head slowly. "Where is your nurse?" Tessa looked around, angry. "Who left you here, alone?" Just then, heavy footsteps echoed on the marble floor. "Get away from him." Tessa looked up to see Dominic striding toward them, his face thunderous. Behind him were 3 guards, and Vanessa, who had clearly looped back to tattle. "I found her harassing him, Alpha," Vanessa lied smoothly, clutching her pearls. "She knocked his food over. I tried to stop her." Dominic stopped, his towering frame casting a shadow over Tessa and Leo. He looked at the shattered plate, the sauce on Tessa's dress, and his son's tear-streaked face. "Is this true?" Dominic growled at Tessa. The alpha command in his voice was strong enough to make a lesser wolf faint. "Did you hurt my son?" Tessa stood up. She was trembling, not from fear, but from rage. She was 5'5" to his 6'4", but she got right in his face. "Are you an idiot or just blind?" Tessa snapped. The entire hallway went silent. The guards gasped. No one spoke to the Alpha King like that. "Excuse me?" Dominic's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "You heard me," Tessa said, pointing a shaking finger at him. "You invite 50 strangers into your home, people you know are ruthless social climbers, and you leave a disabled child alone in a hallway as what? Bait? A test?" Dominic's eyes widened slightly. "I saw what happened," Tessa continued, her voice rising. "That woman," she pointed at Vanessa, "stepped over him like he was garbage. She kicked his communication device away. And you—" She turned her blazing eyes back to Dominic. "You are the worst of them all. You're using his vulnerability to play games. He's not a prop, Dominic. He's a little boy who is scared and covered in pasta sauce because his father cares more about tests than his dignity." Vanessa turned pale. "She's lying, she—" "Quiet," Dominic commanded, never taking his eyes off Tessa. Tessa reached down and squeezed Leo's shoulder gently. "I'm leaving. Keep your stipend. I don't want your money, and I certainly don't want to be Luna to a man who treats his child like a lab rat." She turned to walk away, her cheap dress stained, her head high. "Wait," Dominic said. Tessa stopped but didn't turn. Dominic looked down at his son. Leo wasn't crying anymore. He was looking at Tessa's retreating back, and for the first time in months, he was reaching out. His small hand was extended toward her. Dominic saw it. He felt a punch to his gut. He had indeed set up the hallway scenario as a test. He had been watching via hidden cameras, though he arrived too late to see the start of the interaction. He had seen Vanessa step over him. He had seen Tessa clean him. But he had never expected to be scolded. "You aren't dismissed, Miss Quinn," Dominic said. Tessa turned around, glaring. "I'm not one of your soldiers. I'm a free citizen, and I'm going home." "You have a debt," Dominic said, his voice shifting from anger to something calculating. $200,000 in medical bills for your late mother, held by Blackwood Finance. Tessa went cold. "How do you know that?" "I know everything about everyone in this room," Dominic said. He took a step closer, invading her personal space. The scent of him, rain, cedar and power was overwhelming. You passed the test, Tessa. You're the only one who defended him. You're the only one who didn't care who I was. I don't want the job, Tessa hissed. I'm not offering you a job, Dominic said, his eyes darkening. I'm offering you a deal. You stay. You care for Leo. You act as my Luna for 1 year, and I wipe your debt clean. I'll even buy your mother's house back from the bank. Tessa stared at him. It was a deal with the devil. But she looked down at Leo. The boy was looking at her with such desperate hope that it shattered her resolve. And if I refuse? Then you walk out that door, Dominic said callously, though his heart was hammering in his chest in a way he hadn't felt in years. And the debt collectors arrive tomorrow morning. Tessa clenched her fists until her nails dug into her palms. She looked at Vanessa, who was seething with jealousy. She looked at the arrogant king. And finally, she looked at the boy. 1 year, Tessa said, her voice like ice. Strictly business. I look after Leo. I don't look after you. Dominic's lip curled into a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. Deal. The ink on the non-disclosure agreement was barely dry when Tessa's life was packed into 2 cardboard boxes and moved into the east wing of the Blackwood estate. She wasn't given the Luna's chambers. Dominic had made that clear. Those rooms belong to my late wife, he had said, his voice void of emotion. You will stay in the guest suite across from Leo's nursery. You are an employee with a title, nothing more. The first week was a lesson in isolation. The mansion was a labyrinth of cold marble and silent servants who looked at her with suspicion. To them, she was just the Omega from the diner, a gold digger who had trapped their alpha. But Tessa didn't care about them. She cared about Leo. Leo's room was sterile. It looked more like a high-end hospital ward than a boy's bedroom. White walls, medical equipment beeping rhythmically, and a shelf of toys that looked like they had never been touched. "Good morning, Leo," Tessa said on her 3rd day, marching into the room and throwing open the heavy velvet curtains. Sunlight, rare for the Oregon coast, flooded in. Leo, sitting in his chair by the window, squinted and shielded his eyes. A nurse, a stern woman named Mrs. Gable, gasped, "Miss Quinn, the alpha prefers the curtains drawn. Leo is sensitive to light." "He's a boy, not a vampire, Mrs. Gable," Tessa said firmly. "And he's depressed. Sunlight helps serotonin levels. Unless you have a medical degree that states otherwise, the curtains stay open." Mrs. Gable huffed, clutching her clipboard, but she didn't argue. She left the room, muttering about reporting this to Alpha Dominic. Tessa knelt beside Leo. "Ready for breakfast? I heard the chef made oatmeal, which is boring, so I snuck in some chocolate chips." Leo's eyes lit up. A small, crooked smile appeared on his face. It was the first time she had seen him smile. But the peace didn't last. That evening, Dominic returned from a pack border patrol. He smelled of rain and aggression. He stormed into the dining room where Tessa was feeding Leo. "I received a report," Dominic said, tossing his jacket onto a chair. He didn't sit. He loomed. "You dismissed the physical therapist today." Tessa didn't flinch. She wiped Leo's mouth. The therapist was hurting him. She was forcing the range of motion exercises past his pain threshold. Leo was crying and she ignored him because he's nonverbal. I fired her. Dominic slammed his hand on the table. The silverware rattled. Leo whimpered and shrank into his wheelchair. "You do not have the authority to fire my staff," Dominic growled. "Leo needs that therapy to prevent muscle atrophy. You are coddling him." "I am listening to him." Tessa stood up, matching his glare. "Just because he can't speak doesn't mean he isn't communicating." "He was in agony, Dominic. There are other therapists. gentle ones. I made calls today and found a specialist in Portland who works with cerebral palsy patients using hydrotherapy. It's less painful." Dominic paused. The anger in his eyes shifted to confusion. "You did research?" "Yes. I spent 4 hours reading his medical files while you were out playing soldier," Tessa snapped. "I know about his hip dysplasia. I know about his sensory processing disorder. Do you? Or do you just sign the checks and hope the problem goes away?" The silence that stretched between them was thick enough to choke on. Dominic looked at this small Omega woman, wearing jeans and a t-shirt in his grand dining room, challenging him on the welfare of his own son. No one had fought him on Leo's care in 5 years. Everyone just agreed with him, terrified of his temper. "Hydrotherapy," Dominic repeated, the word feeling foreign. "Yes. In the pool. Tomorrow," Tessa said. "And you should come." "I have meetings." "Cancel them," Tessa said, turning back to Leo. "He's your son, not your project. He needs his father in the water with him, holding him up, not watching from a balcony." Dominic stared at the back of her head. He wanted to rage. He wanted to remind her of her place. But he looked at Leo, who was watching Tessa with a look of absolute adoration. "Fine," Dominic grunted. "Tomorrow, 2 p.m. If this goes wrong, Quinn, you're out." "If it goes wrong," Tessa retorted, "I'll pack my own bags." The next afternoon, the indoor pool was heated. Tessa wore a modest one-piece swimsuit. She was nervous. Dominic appeared wearing swim trunks, revealing a body that was scarred and sculpted from years of war. A massive claw mark ran down his chest, a reminder of the rogue attack that took his wife. Getting Leo into the water was a process, but once he was buoyant, the magic happened. The water supported his weight. His legs, usually stiff and painful, relaxed. "Hold him here," Tessa instructed Dominic, guiding his large hands to Leo's waist. Dominic flinched at the contact. He hadn't held his son properly in years. He was terrified he would break him. "Relax," Tessa whispered, drifting close to him. "He can feel your tension. Just breathe, Dominic." Dominic looked down. Leo was paddling his hands, laughing, a wet, gurgling sound of pure joy. The water splashed onto Dominic's face. For a moment, the Alpha King forgot his grief. He forgot the politics. He just saw his boy. He looked up at Tessa. Her wet hair was plastered to her face, her eyes shining with triumph. She looked beautiful, not in the polished, fake way of the high society she-wolves, but in a raw, real way. "He likes it," Dominic murmured, his voice hoarse. "He loves it," Tessa corrected. They stayed in the water for an hour. For the first time, the gilded cage felt a little less like a prison and a little more like a home. But outside the estate walls, news of the Omega Luna was spreading, and Vanessa St. James was not about to let a waitress steal her crown without a fight. 2 weeks later, the annual Moonlight Charity Gala arrived. It was the most important social event of the year for the werewolf aristocracy. Every alpha from the neighboring territories would be there. It was also Tessa's public debut as the fiancé. "You need to look the part," Kaelin, the beta, told her as a team of stylists descended on her room. "The press will be vicious. If you look weak, the stock prices for Blackwood Global drop. It's that simple." They dressed her in a gown of shimmering silver silk that hugged every curve, with a slit that went up to her mid-thigh. They put diamonds around her throat, heavy, cold stones that felt like a collar. When she walked down the grand staircase, Dominic was waiting at the bottom. He wore a black tuxedo. When he looked up and saw her, his breath hitched. He quickly masked it with a scowl. "Don't trip," was all he said. "Charming as ever, Your Majesty," Tessa replied dryly. The ballroom was a shark tank. As soon as they entered, hundreds of eyes fixed on them. Whispers hissed through the crowd like steam. "That's her? The charity case? I heard she seduced him to pay off a debt. She doesn't even have a wolf scent. Weak." Tessa gripped Dominic's arm. His muscles were hard as rock. "Steady," he whispered, leaning down. "Head up. You're with me." It was the first time he had offered her verbal support. It gave her the strength to smile. Then she saw Vanessa. Vanessa was wearing gold, looking like a trophy. She was standing with her father, the Gamma, near the buffet. When she saw Tessa, her eyes narrowed into slits. "Tessa! Darling!" Vanessa breezed over, fake smile plastered on. "You look surprisingly adequate. Did the stylists have to work overtime?" "Hello, Vanessa," Tessa said coolly. "You look expensive." "Dominic," Vanessa purred, ignoring Tessa and touching the Alpha's bicep. "My father needs to speak with you about the northern border disputes. Alone." Dominic looked at Tessa. "Stay here. Don't speak to the press. I'll be back in 5 minutes." He left her. Tessa stood alone near the chocolate fountain, feeling exposed. She scanned the room for Leo. Dominic had insisted Leo attend for 1 hour to show family unity. The boy was in his wheelchair in the corner, supervised by Mrs. Gable. Tessa started to walk toward him when a waiter bumped into her, spilling champagne on her skirt. "Oh, I am so sorry, miss," the waiter cried. "It's fine," Tessa said, distracted. She wiped at the dress. In that split second of distraction, Vanessa walked past Leo's wheelchair. Tessa looked up just in time to see Vanessa's hand hover over Leo's cup of specialized juice that sat on his tray. It was a quick, sleight-of-hand movement. A small pinch of white powder fell into the cup. Vanessa kept walking, disappearing into the crowd. Tessa's heart stopped. She didn't know what the powder was, but she knew Vanessa was evil. Leo reached for the cup. "No!" Tessa screamed. She abandoned all etiquette. She hiked up her silver gown and sprinted across the ballroom in her heels. The music stopped. Heads turned. The crazy Omega was running. Leo had the straw to his lips. Tessa dove. She literally threw herself at the wheelchair, slapping the cup out of Leo's hand. The purple juice splattered everywhere, all over Leo's white suit, all over Mrs. Gable, and all over the pristine floor. "How dare you!" Mrs. Gable shrieked. "You crazy woman!" Leo burst into tears, terrified by Tessa's sudden violence. Dominic came running back, the crowd parting for him. He saw his son crying, the mess, and Tessa panting on the floor, her dress ruined. "What is the meaning of this?" Dominic roared, his voice shaking the chandeliers. "She's unstable, Alpha." Vanessa appeared from the crowd, looking horrified. "I saw it. She just attacked him. She slapped the drink right out of his hand. She's clearly having a mental breakdown. She's not fit to be Luna." The crowd murmured in agreement. Psycho. Unfit. Dangerous. Dominic looked down at Tessa. His eyes were cold fury. "Explain yourself. Now." Tessa scrambled to her knees. She didn't look at Dominic. She looked at the puddle of juice on the floor. It was fizzing slightly. "The drink," Tessa panted. "Vanessa put something in it." "Liar," Vanessa gasped. "Alpha, this is slander. I was on the other side of the room." "Check the cameras," Tessa yelled. "And check the drink." "This is ridiculous." The Gamma, Vanessa's father, stepped forward. "My daughter is of noble blood. You will not accuse her, you filth." "Test the drink," Tessa screamed, desperate. "Leo is allergic to peanuts, severely. If that powder was peanut dust, he would have gone into anaphylactic shock in seconds. He would have died, Dominic." Dominic went still. Peanut dust. It was a common assassin's tool for targets with allergies because it dissolved quickly and looked like sugar. "Kaelin, Dominic said, his voice deadly quiet. "Get the testing kit. Now." "Dominic, you can't be serious," Vanessa laughed nervously. "You're going to humiliate me because the help is paranoid?" Kalen ran back with a portable toxin scanner used for the Alpha's food. He dipped the sensor into the puddle on the floor. The room held its breath. Beep. 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 A red light flashed. "Positive," Kalen announced, his face pale. "High concentration of peanut protein. Lethal dose for a child of Leo's weight." The silence in the ballroom was absolute. Vanessa's face went white. She took a step back. Someone else must have..." Dominic turned slowly to face Vanessa. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. His wolf was surfacing, his eyes glowing a luminous, predatory gold. "You tried to kill my son," Dominic whispered. It was scarier than if he had shouted. "No, I just wanted her to look bad. It wasn't supposed to kill him, just make him sick," Vanessa blurted out, realizing too late what she had admitted. "Guard!" Dominic barked. "Take her to the cells and take her father for questioning." As the guards dragged a screaming Vanessa away, Dominic turned back to Tessa. She was still on the floor, her knees bruised, her dress stained with purple juice. She was shaking, adrenaline crashing. Dominic knelt down. He didn't care about the juice. He didn't care about the crowd. He took Tessa's face in his hands. "You saved him," he said, his voice filled with a reverence she had never heard before. "I told you," Tessa whispered, tears finally spilling over. "I watch him. You people just watch the politics." Dominic scooped her up into his arms, bridal style. He stood up, holding her against his chest. He looked at the crowd of stunned elites. "The gala is over," Dominic announced. "Everyone out." He carried Tessa up the grand staircase, leaving the whispering world behind. For the first time, he didn't see a debt to be paid. He saw a partner. But as he carried her, Tessa felt a sharp pain in her side. She looked down. In her dive to save Leo, she had crashed into the metal edge of the wheelchair. Her side was bleeding, staining the silver dress crimson. "Dominic," she whispered, her vision blurring. He looked down and saw the blood. His eyes widened in panic. "Medic!" the Alpha King screamed, sprinting down the hallway. "Get a medic!" The steady beep, beep, beep of the heart monitor was the first thing Tessa heard. She blinked her eyes open. The harsh white lights of the Blackwood medical wing made her squint. She tried to sit up, but a sharp, searing pain in her side forced a gasp from her lips. "Don't move," a deep voice commanded. It wasn't angry, it was ragged, exhausted. Tessa turned her head. Dominic was sitting in a plastic chair next to her bed. He looked terrible. His tuxedo shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, his jaw was covered in heavy stubble, and his eyes were bloodshot. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in 3 days. "Leo," Tessa rasped, her throat dry. "He's fine," Dominic said, leaning forward to pour her a glass of water with a shaking hand. "He's asleep in the next room. He refused to go back to the nursery. He wanted to be close to you." Tessa took the water, sipping it slowly. Memories of the gala flooded back. The juice, the dive, the metal smashing into her ribs. 3 broken ribs and a lacerated spleen. Dominic recited the medical report as if it were a list of his own failures. "You needed emergency surgery. You lost a lot of blood." "I'm alive," Tessa whispered. "And Leo is alive. That's what matters." Dominic stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the grey ocean. "I thought you were a gold digger," he said quietly. "When I saw your file, the debt, the poverty, I thought you were just another desperate Omega looking for a payday. I thought I could buy your compliance." He turned to face her, his expression raw. "But I was wrong. You didn't dive in front of that wheelchair for money. You didn't stand up to me for a paycheck." "I did it because he's a child," Tessa said softly, "and because he deserves to be loved, Dominic. Not managed." Dominic looked at his hands. "I forgot how to do that. When my wife died, when I saw Leo in that wheelchair, unable to speak, I felt like I had failed him. Every time I looked at him, I saw my failure. So I pulled away. I thought if I built an empire, if I made Blackwood Global untouchable, he would be safe. But I was building a fortress while the enemy was already inside." He walked back to the bed and sat on the edge, careful not to jostle her. He took her hand. His skin was rough, warm, and electric against hers. "Vanessa talked," Dominic revealed, his voice darkening. "She didn't act alone. Her father, Gamma Sterling, was funneling money from my accounts. They wanted Leo out of the way, so that when I eventually died, the leadership would pass to the Gamma line, not my disabled son. They were going to kill him, Tessa. Slowly, with peanut dust and neglect." Tessa squeezed his hand. "They're gone now." "They are in the dungeon awaiting the council's judgment," Dominic corrected. "But that doesn't fix what I broke. I need you, Tessa. Leo needs you." "I have a contract," Tessa reminded him, though her heart was pounding. 1 year. "Burn the contract," Dominic said intensely. "I don't want an employee. I want—" He hesitated, the ruthless king struggling for words. "I want the woman who saved my son. I want you to stay because you want to, not because of a debt." Before Tessa could answer, the door creaked open. A small wheelchair whirred in. Leo was wearing his pajamas, clutching a stuffed wolf toy. When he saw Tessa awake, his face lit up. He motored over to the bed, tears welling in his eyes. "Hey, buddy," Tessa smiled, ignoring the pain in her ribs to reach out to him. Leo grabbed her hand and pressed it to his cheek. Then he looked at his father. He made a series of gestures with his hands, clumsy but deliberate. Dominic frowned. I don't know what he's saying." Tessa watched the boy's hands. She had been studying sign language online in the evenings, suspecting Leo could learn it if given the chance. "He's not signing," Tessa realized. "He's pointing. At you, then me, then him." Leo did it again. "Daddy. Tessa. Leo." Then he brought his hands together and interlaced his fingers. Together. Dominic looked at his son, then at Tessa. The ice around his heart, which had been thawing for weeks, finally shattered. "Okay, Leo," Dominic whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Together." Recovery was slow, but the atmosphere in the Blackwood estate had shifted. The curtains were open. Music played in the hallways. The staff, seeing how the Alpha treated Tessa, began to treat her with genuine respect. 2 weeks after the surgery, Tessa was sitting in the garden with Leo, reading a book, when the security alarms began to wail. "Whoop! Whoop! Whoop! Code Red!" Kalen's voice boomed over the intercom. "Perimeter breach. Alpha, we have hostiles at the north gate." Tessa's instinct kicked in. She dropped the book. "Leo, let's go." She grabbed the handles of his wheelchair. The motor was too slow for an emergency, and began to push him toward the house. Dominic came sprinting out of the back door, a handgun in his waistband, his eyes glowing gold. "Get to the panic room," Dominic shouted at her. "It's Sterling's loyalists. The Gamma's remaining men are trying to break him out of the holding cells, and they're using the house as a distraction." "Go," Tessa yelled back. "I've got Leo." Dominic hesitated for a split second, looking at her. "I will come for you. I promise." Then he shifted. Bones cracked and reshaped as he exploded into a massive, midnight black wolf. He roared and charged toward the north gate to lead the defense. Tessa pushed Leo into the library, where the entrance to the panic room was hidden behind a bookshelf. She punched in the code Dominic had taught her. Access denied. Tessa froze. She typed it again. Access denied. System override, a cold voice said from behind her. Tessa spun around, shielding Leo with her body. Standing in the doorway was not a soldier, but Mr. Thorne, the estate's head of security, a man Dominic had trusted for 10 years. He was holding a pistol, and he was smiling. "Thorne," Tessa breathed, "you're working with them?" "Sterling pays better," Thorne shrugged, "and he promised me the Alpha position once Dominic is dead. But first, I need leverage to make the king surrender." He pointed the gun at Leo. "Come here, boy." Leo whimpered, burying his face in Tessa's stomach. "Over my dead body," Tessa snarled. She wasn't a shifter. She didn't have claws, but she had the rage of a mother protecting her cub. "That can be arranged," Thorne said, raising the gun. Tessa looked around frantically. A heavy brass globe sat on the desk, a letter opener. Not enough against a gun. "Leo," Tessa whispered, her hand finding the control stick on his motorized chair. "Do you trust me?" Leo looked up and nodded. "Duck." Tessa slammed the joystick forward to maximum speed. The heavy motorized wheelchair surged forward like a battering ram. Thorne, expecting them to cower, wasn't ready. The metal footrest of the chair smashed into his shins with a sickening crunch. Thorne screamed and fired the gun blindly. The bullet shattered a vase next to Tessa's head. As Thorne fell, Tessa lunged. She didn't go for the gun. She went for the heavy antique curtains. She yanked the tie-back cord with all her strength. The heavy velvet fabric collapsed, burying the struggling traitor in a mountain of cloth. "Run, Leo! Go!" Tessa shouted, grabbing the gun that had skittered across the floor. Thorne was fighting his way out of the fabric, shifting into his wolf form, a mangy brown beast. He snarled, shredding the velvet. Tessa held the gun with shaking hands. She had never fired a weapon in her life. The wolf lunged. Bang! Tessa didn't fire. The shot came from the terrace door. Thorne's wolf yelped and collapsed, a tranquilizer dart sticking out of his neck. Dominic stood in the shattered doorway, in human form again, naked from the waist up, blood smeared on his chest. None of it his own. He held a high-powered rifle. He looked at Tessa, holding the pistol. He looked at Leo, who had reversed his chair to ram the traitor. Dominic walked over, stepped on the unconscious traitor's neck to ensure he stayed down, and then pulled Tessa into a bone-crushing hug. "You missed the panic room," he murmured into her hair, his heart hammering against her chest. The lock was jammed. She shook, the adrenaline fading. "We improvised." Dominic looked at his son. "You ran him over?" Leo grinned, a shaky, terrified but proud grin. Dominic threw his head back and laughed, a sound of pure relief. "That's my boy. That's my pack." The silence that fell over the Blackwood estate in the weeks following the siege was not the silence of a tomb, as it had been before Tessa arrived. It was the silence of a held breath, a pause before a new beginning. The cleanup was brutal and efficient. Dominic didn't just fire the security team. He dismantled the entire infrastructure that the traitorous Gamma Sterling had built. For 3 weeks, the estate was a revolving door of interrogators, forensic accountants, and council members. Dominic was ruthless. He stripped Sterling of his rank, his assets, and his freedom. The former Gamma and his daughter, Vanessa, were exiled to the northern wastes, a punishment far worse than prison for a socialite like Vanessa. They would spend the rest of their lives scraping for survival in the permafrost, stripped of their titles and their pride. But while Dominic waged war in the boardroom and the courts, Tessa fought a different battle in the East Wing. Her recovery was slow. The bruised ribs made laughing painful, and the psychological weight of holding a gun, of pulling that trigger to save Leo, weighed on her. She wasn't a soldier. She was a waitress, a survivor. And now, something else entirely. She noticed the shift in the staff first. Before, they had looked through her. Now, when she walked down the hall with her cane, heads bowed. The kitchen staff prepared Leo's meals according to her exact nutritional specifications without complaint. Even the new head of security, a towering mercenary named Graves, stopped to salute her when she entered a room. She had earned her place in blood. But there was still the matter of the paper. The contract. It sat in the drawer of her bedside table. Technically, she still had 10 months left on her term as the fake Luna. But everything had changed. The pretense was gone. The lines between business and survival had been blurred into oblivion. Dominic had been distant since the attack. He slept in the chair next to her bed for the first week, waking at every sound, checking the perimeter like a caged animal. But as she healed, he withdrew. He spent 18 hours a day in his office. Tessa knew why. He blamed himself. He felt that his negligence had almost cost him the 2 people he had realized he couldn't live without. Tessa knew she had to force his hand. She wasn't going to wait for him to brood himself into another 5 years of isolation. One rainy Tuesday, a month after the attack, Tessa dressed with purpose. She didn't wear the silk gowns the stylists had bought her. She wore a sharp navy blue blazer over a cream blouse and tailored trousers. She looked like a CEO, not a consort. She picked up a thick black folder she had spent the last 2 weeks compiling and marched to the Alpha's study. Graves, the new guard, stepped aside instantly. "Mum, he's in a conference call with the European pack leaders." "He can call them back," Tessa said calmly, pushing open the heavy oak doors. Dominic was standing by the window, phone pressed to his ear, staring out at the storm. He looked exhausted. His shoulders were tight, his posture defensive. When he heard the door, he turned, ready to snap at the intruder. When he saw Tessa, the aggression melted instantly, replaced by a soft, weary concern. "I have to go," Dominic said into the phone, hanging up without a goodbye. He crossed the room in 3 strides. "Tessa, should you be up? The doctor said I'm healing, not invalid," Tessa interrupted. She walked past him and sat in the leather chair opposite his massive obsidian desk. She placed the black folder between them. "Sit down, Dominic. We're negotiating." Dominic blinked, confused. He sat slowly. "Negotiating what?" "If this is about the security upgrades, I've already approved the motion sensors for the nursery." "This isn't about security. It's about us. And it's about money." Dominic sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. "Tessa, please. I told you, the debt is gone. I deleted the file from the Blackwood finance server myself. You don't owe me a dime. You own the house your mother lived in. It's done." "It's not done," Tessa said, her voice steady. "Because I never agreed to charity." She opened the folder. Inside were spreadsheets, legal drafts, and a mission statement. "You hired me to be a Luna because you needed a PR boost," Tessa began. "You needed the pack to see a softer side of the Blackwood administration. Well, you got it. My approval ratings are higher than yours. The pack trusts me because I'm one of them. I know what it's like to choose between rent and medicine." Dominic looked at the papers, intrigued despite himself. "Where are you going with this?" "This is a proposal for the Omega Initiative," Tessa said, tapping the document. "It's a philanthropic branch of Blackwood Global. We provide interest-free medical loans to low-income pack members. We fund accessible housing for families with disabled children. We overhaul the pack's special needs education system." She looked him in the eye. "I will run it. I will be the executive director. I want a salary, Dominic, a market-rate salary. And from that salary, I will pay you back the $200,000 for my mother's bills, every single cent, with interest." Dominic stared at her. The silence stretched for a long, agonizing minute. He looked at the woman who had dived in front of a wheelchair, who had shot a wolf to save his son, and who was now sitting in his office demanding the right to pay a debt he had already forgiven. He realized then that he had never met anyone like her. She didn't want his power. She wanted her own dignity. "You want to work?" Dominic asked softly. "You don't have to. You could have anything." "I don't want anything," Tessa said, her voice softening just a fraction. "I want to be here, Dominic. But I can't be here as your dependent. I can't be the poor Omega girl you saved. That power dynamic. It won't work. If we are going to do this, if we are going to be a real family for Leo, we have to be equals. I need to know that I'm standing beside you, not behind you." Dominic stood up. He walked around the desk. The rain lashed against the glass, but inside the air was warm. He didn't look at the folder. He looked at her. "Equals," he repeated, testing the word. "Yes." Dominic reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small velvet box. He had been carrying it for 3 weeks, ever since the night of the siege. He had been terrified to give it to her, terrified she would see it as another chain, another contract, but she had just proved that no chain could hold her. "I accept your proposal," Dominic said, his voice thick with emotion. "On one condition." Tessa raised an eyebrow, her heart beginning to hammer against her ribs. "I'm listening." Dominic dropped to one knee. The sight of the Alpha King, the most feared man on the West Coast, kneeling on the Persian rug, took the breath from her lungs. "The condition is that you run this foundation as Tessa Blackwood," Dominic said. He opened the box. It wasn't a diamond. Dominic knew she would hate a diamond. She would think it was wasteful. Instead, it was a ring of woven white gold, intricate and delicate, resembling the briar vines of the pack crest. But instead of thorns, the vines held a single, rare grey sapphire, the exact colour of Leo's eyes. And Dominic's. "I don't want a contract," Dominic whispered, taking her trembling hand. "I don't want an employee. I want a partner. I want the woman who taught me how to be a father again." "You saved his life, Tessa. But you saved my soul too. I was a ghost in this house until you walked in and opened the curtains." Tears spilled over Tessa's lashes. "Dominic, marry me," he pleaded, his grey eyes searching hers, "not for the pack, not for the cameras. Marry me because I love you. Marry me because I can't imagine waking up a single day without fighting with you about hydrotherapy or business plans." Tessa laughed, a wet, choked sound. She slid off the chair, dropping to her knees so she was level with him. "You're going to be a terrible boss," she smiled, tears streaming down her face. "I'll let you run the meetings," he promised. "Yes," Tessa whispered, leaning her forehead against his. "Yes, Dominic. I'll marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. And for the first time in the history of the Blackwood pack, the king kissed his queen, not as a possession, but as his equal. 1 year later. The nursery was bathed in the soft, golden light of late afternoon. It had been a year of massive change. The Omega Initiative was a roaring success, lauded across the region for stabilizing the economy of the lower castes. Tessa was busier than ever, balancing board meetings with baby monitors. Dominic had changed too. He was still the alpha, still fierce, still protective, but the darkness was gone. He came home at 5. He took weekends off, but the most important change was happening right now on the plush carpet of the nursery floor. Leo was 7 now. He was growing stronger every day thanks to the hydrotherapy and the new specialists Tessa had hired. He sat in a modified floor seat, his eyes fixed intently on the crib in front of him. Inside the crib was Hope, Tessa and Dominic's 3-month-old daughter. She was blowing bubbles, waving her chubby fists in the air. Tessa sat nearby, folding laundry, while Dominic stood in the doorway, having just returned from patrol. He leaned against the frame, watching his son interact with his daughter. Leo reached out a shaking hand. He touched the baby's foot gently. Hope cooed and kicked. Leo took a deep breath. His face scrunched up in concentration. He had been working with a speech pathologist for 6 months, making guttural sounds, learning to control the muscles in his throat, but he had never formed a clear word. He looked at the baby. He looked at Tessa. "Tss," Leo hissed, his jaw trembling with effort. Tessa froze. She put the laundry down. Dominic straightened up, holding his breath. "Tss. See." Leo pushed the air through his teeth. He squeezed his eyes shut, fighting his own body, determined to claim his role as the big brother. "Sister." The word was slurred. It was quiet. It was broken. But it was there. Sister. Tessa covered her mouth, a sob escaping her throat. Dominic dropped his tactical bag. He rushed across the room, falling to his knees beside his son. "Leo!" Dominic choked out, his eyes wide. "Did you say that again, buddy?" Leo opened his eyes. He looked at his father, beaming with a pride so bright it outshone the sun. He pointed at the crib. "Sister," he said again, stronger this time. Tessa wrapped her arms around Leo from one side, and Dominic wrapped his from the other, sandwiching the boy in a fierce embrace. The baby, sensing the excitement, let out a happy squeal. "That's right," Dominic whispered into his son's hair, tears running unashamedly down the Alpha King's face. "That's your sister, and you're her brother. You're her protector." Leo looked at Tessa. He slowly uncurled his fist and placed his hand over hers, just as he had done in that dark hallway the night they met. He didn't need to speak to tell her what he felt. But he had found his voice anyway, because she had given him the courage to find it. The Alpha King had searched for a Luna to save his image. Instead, he found a mother who saved his family. And as the sun set over the Blackwood estate, casting long shadows over a home filled with laughter and clumsy first words, everyone knew that the reign of the ruthless king was over. The reign of the Blackwood family had just begun. And that is the story of how an Omega waitress brought the Alpha King to his knees, not with force, but with compassion. Dominic thought he was testing Tessa, but in the end, she was the one testing him. She proved that true strength isn't about claws or commands. It's about protecting the vulnerable when no one else will. What do you think? If you were Tessa, could you have forgiven Dominic for how he treated her in the beginning? Or would you have walked away after the debt was paid? Let me know in the comments below. I love reading your theories. If you enjoyed this roller coaster of romance and revenge, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. We have a crazy werewolf thriller coming up next week that you won't want to miss. Thanks for watching.